and welcome to tonight's presentation on short sales. And my name is Bernadette Trafton. I am the founder of the Boston Area Real Estate Investors Association, and today I get to introduce to you Gabe Tavares with Loss Mitigation Services. And I was introduced to Gabe and his team over at Loss Mitigation Services by an investor who I know, who I've worked with for a long time, and they love what these guys do so much that they took their own short sale business and stopped doing it, and they just let Gabe and his team handle all of their short sales. So these guys are definitely the experts in Massachusetts. Gabe's going to go through a presentation. So if you have any questions, write down your questions, and we can we can certainly get him to answer the questions at the end. All you have to do is raise your hand or put your question into the little chat bar. If you raise your hand, I can actually unmute you, and I'll be taking care of that side of things, and Gabe is going to go through the presentation. So welcome, Gabe. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Bernadette.
Fantastic. Well, I am going to turn it over to you. I'm going to mute my myself out so that if my dogs decide that they want to bark in the background, that nobody hears it. And I'm going to let you take it away. So you can't hear anybody clap, but I'm sure people are clapping because they're happy to listen to what you have to say. So
everybody's super excited about talking about short sales, which take a really long time, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think by the end of this, everybody's going to think the same thing that the folks at Brownstone did, was that you guys need to just take care of their short sales for them. But take it away. It's all, the floor is yours.
Sounds good. So thank you very much, Bernadette, for the introduction. First things first, we're a short sale processing company. So our core function is to help sellers and brokers complete short sale transactions. So from a 10,000 foot view, I'm sure everybody's heard about short sales just because they've become so prominent, particularly since the market downturn in 2008. Really, a short sale is negotiating a settlement between the mortgagees and the seller who's attempting to sell a property that they can no longer afford, that may be underwater, so on and so forth. So in every single one of these situations, the bank looks to define the borrower's hardship and then subsequently approve a short sale based on their hardship and the fair market value of the property. So a lot of the presentation I'll go through fairly quickly. So I'm going to try and go through it as quickly as possible because I think for the most part, for anybody that's on this broadcast, really what you guys want to know is how can you do more deals, and how can short sales help you do more transactions or purchase more of these properties that you see that are clearly in distress that may, qualify for a short sale. So first things first, our first deck is just a brief outline of what we're going to go through. So the biggest thing to cover is why. From a short sale standpoint, believe it or not, there are estimates that still reflect that 21% of all properties in the United States may still be underwater. Now, that 21% number definitely doesn't apply to Massachusetts because Massachusetts property prices have caught up faster than most of the rest of the country because our median household income is higher and property prices in the property market is very strong in Massachusetts. However, it's almost a guarantee that you drive by a prospective or a potential short sale all of the time. And maybe the ugly house at the end of the street, or maybe the ugly house in the middle of the street in a really nice neighborhood, or the house on Main Street that clearly needs a new roof, that needs a lot of work. And you may drive by it all the time and say to yourself, well, it's vacant. I wish I could just buy it. Why doesn't it come to market? Why is that house not being sold? Well, over the course of the presentation, we'll go through some of the reasons why it's not being sold. But for the most part, even though the idea, the concept of a short sale has been widely disseminated, more times than not, there's a lot of misinformation for the sellers themselves. People are really scared of the idea that they may owe $400,000 on a loan, and they may be interested in selling, but then they realize that they can actually only sell the house for $350,000, let alone the real estate commissions and whatever else is associated with the sale. So they're thinking, how could I possibly sell? Is the bank going to come after me, so on and so forth? And obviously for anybody in the industry that does these sorts of transactions, there's a simple answer and a simple solution to that problem. But again, the bottom line is that a lot of a lot of these properties represent potential great opportunities for investments, flips, wholesales, so on and so forth. So if we were to accept that number as 21% of all properties of the U.S. may still be underwater, that would mean that 1 out of every 5 sellers would need an agent or a company like ours with short sale expertise. You know, a lot of the presentation that we're going to go through is particularly tailored to listing brokers because we work with listing brokers all the time. So we say to listing brokers all the time, if you find yourself in these situations where you're talking to a prospective seller about a short sale, but you've heard all the nightmares about a short sales, how long they take, so on and so forth, there are also huge benefits for you as a listing agent. And those huge benefits are there's no haggling really over the list price. The seller understands that they're not going to walk out with a ton of money. They know they're underwater. They need to sell, and really what they're looking for is just to be out from underneath the mortgage. So while oftentimes in traditional retail real estate, a seller is unrealistic about what the property is actually worth because it's their house, in a short sale situation, you can very easily say to that seller, listen, the objective here is to sell to get you out from underneath the mortgage. The house is not worth $400,000. Based on the fact that you have deferred maintenance, that you haven't done this, the area, the market, so on and so forth, it's really just worth $315,000. And since they're not losing out on that $85,000 or whatever it would be in terms of money that they would put in their pocket, they're not as likely to fight you on the list price, so you can actually list at market. Additionally, obviously the commissions, price adjustments, and things like that, and particularly commissions, are paid by the lender. So selling a $400,000 property and obtaining a 5 to 6% commission isn't as much of a fight because it's not coming out of the seller's pocket. It's coming out of the bank's pocket in a short sale transaction. So those are big advantages when you're talking to prospective sellers and you're looking to engage them as a listing broker. And obviously having us completes the cycle. So our service in a nutshell, sorry about that, give me 1 second guys. So our service in a nutshell, this is what we offer. We offer a streamlined short sale service that puts listing agents in control of their short sale pipeline. So basically what that means is instead of being buried by calling the bank, gathering documents, making sure the documents are correct, following up, faxing things out to the bank, we do all of those things for you. So we gather the documents from the sellers. We prepare the HUD or the closing disclosure once there's an offer. We internally have an attorney that will work with the seller to make sure that their interests are protected, and there's no cost to the seller. We negotiate the short sale in terms of making sure that the bank understands that a BPO agent didn't take into account the fact that a roof needed to be replaced, that a septic needed to be redone, that based on the area, a septic is a much larger job than it would be in another township, so on and so forth. And those are all things that we negotiate and take into account and represent both the seller's interests and the listing broker's interest. We also act as a central point of contact for you, the sellers, and the buyer side. So, you know, at our core, we really have a really good fundamental understanding of real estate, mortgages, but we also offer what essentially is an assistant service for you with short sale transactions. because we respond to buyers, we respond to sellers, so on and so forth, and make sure that we keep everybody in the deal. And again, whether you're listing a short sale, looking to buy a short sale, getting access to information and getting access to good information is critical, and that's really the biggest benefit of our service. We also coordinate the closing, so we have an entire group in our office that's dedicated just to closing. We have an attorney that works in our closing group, and we also have 2 former underwriters. My business partner, Jamie, is a former underwriter, has close to 20 years of experience with mortgages. So we've seen just about every scenario, we've seen every document, we've seen every affidavit, we've seen all of those things. And again, hiring our service and bringing us on, you get all of that experience essentially at no cost. And when you're having these conversations with prospective sellers, you can essentially market yourself as an expert, understanding that you have all of our background working on your end. So we do all of this, and we get listing agents their entire commission. Our fees are paid directly by the lender. So those are the big, bullet points. So the process, for the seller, it's pretty simple. The property is listed, so that conversation is had with the seller. The biggest error that we've seen listing agents make is emphasize too much or talk too much about money, or talk too much about money, period, with a person in distress. If you talk to somebody who's in distress and the focus of that conversation is about money, you're going to find yourself in a position where they're going to want to get as much as they can from you, and then they're going to use that kind of as a bargaining chip or as leverage against you. And this is the case not only if you're trying to list a short sale, but it is also the case if you're trying to acquire a short sale. In other words, you see a beat-up property, you drive by, you contact the owner, and then at that point in time, you engage the owner in some way. The reason why the relationship between us and Brownstone has worked so well is I think Chris and Kim have a very good understanding of consumers in distress. And a consumer in distress being approached by someone who is looking to buy their house to flip their house, that consumer's immediate response is going to be, well, you're rich, I'm not really doing very well, I need to get as much money out of you as possible. Creates a real problem when you're doing the short sale and then you find yourself in a position where the prospective property is a really good buy at 200, but maybe it's not so good of a buy at 215. And if you've contacted that seller as a buyer attempting to purchase the property and gotten them on board by saying, look, at the end of this, I'll give you $10,000, and the market turns a little bit, and when everything is said and done, the bank is looking for $210,000, and you're forced to pay $220, then it puts you in a position where it's no longer a good deal, and it no longer works for anyone. Any conversation had with anyone in a position of distress and somebody who needs to short sell a property, the entire conversation is about the fact that by short selling, they're going to get immediate relief. We had a client years ago who hired us on to do a short sale. And this gentleman was a member of the community. He had been in that community for a long time. The only reason he found himself behind the mortgage in the first place was as a result of a business catastrophe. He was a fisherman. He had bought a brand new boat, and unfortunately, got in an accident with the boat, was out of work for 6 months. The insurance company just didn't pay him as quickly as they should have, so he ended up being out of work and out of business for about 6 or 8 months, was then subsequently never able to recover. This gentleman had lived in that house, which, by the way, was one of the best streets in that town, for 25 years. When I met him, his son was captain of the hockey team at the local high school. his son couldn't have his friends over at his house because his dad was afraid that his friends would come and there'd be a sign on the door, saying that they were going to be evicted or the property was going to be foreclosed or whatever the case would be. So our entire conversation with that gentleman had nothing to do with how much money he was going to walk out with. Had everything to do with the fact that that's not living. Being in a position where you're afraid for your son to bring over his friends to the house as a result of a bad mortgage that you took or a bad situation that you had 8 years previously, that's not living. And really what we offered, Mike in that situation was we offered him peace of mind. We offered him, I said to him, Mike, you're waking up each and every single morning and all you're thinking about is how far behind you are in your house and how you could lose your house. And I know that you don't want to lose your house, and I know that you've lived in this town forever, and I know that everybody knows you, but why not just start over? Hire me, I'll get you out from underneath the mortgage, and I'll put you in a position where you can walk away without owing the money on the mortgage, they'll forgive the debt, and then you can start over. And you will start over, because it's not as if he stopped working. The bank just didn't let him get back on track. So it all starts there. It really all starts with the owner who's underwater understanding that it's not going to last forever. They're not going to be in a position where they can live in a house without paying a mortgage, that they should move on, that it is the best thing for them, even if they're not walking away with money, even if they're letting go a home that they really love, that their kids grew up in. It's really having them make the emotional commitment that they know they should, walk away. And walking away in a short sale situation is the best possible way because they have control, and the bank more times than not forgives the debt. So the process itself is very similar. If any of you have bought a home, the short sale process, the way that I like to explain it, is purchasing a home in reverse. So what you do when you go to purchase a home, you work with a real estate agent, finds you a home, then you work with a loan officer. The loan officer is going to ask you to submit an application. That application needs to be supported by pay stubs, bank statements, tax returns. And what the bank is trying to establish is your creditworthiness. They're trying to establish that you can actually maintain the mortgage payments and that you have reasonable assets to justify the mortgage. Once they've approved you personally in terms of validating your creditworthiness, realizing that you have the means to pay them back, then they appraise the property to make sure that the collateral that they're lending on is worth as much as they're lending you. In a short sale, you essentially go through that process in reverse. So as a seller, you're going to find an agent that's going to list the property. Once the property is listed and you get an offer, now the bank is going to review you as a seller needing hardship assistance. Instead of verifying that you're actually going to be able to pay the mortgage, they want to verify that you have a hardship, that there's a reason why you can't pay the mortgage. Once they determine that you indeed have a hardship and that you qualify for help, then they want to know, well, what's the liquidation value of the property? They determine that by appraising the property and taking all factors into account. And at that point in time, once those two things line up, a short sale approval is issued, and then you can close a transaction. So lots of people say lots of things about short sales, and they make them much more complicated than they are. However, at its core, that's realistically what you're looking to accomplish. You're looking to get the property listed, have it marketed, have somebody submit an offer. Once an offer is submitted, the seller situation is reviewed, the property is appraised, and then the bank allows the short sale and issues terms for the sale. So what are some things that get in the way? So what are the biggest factors? And why do short sales take so long? I think it's ironic that they call them short sales because they take so long. and I often joke about it. So the time involved in completing a short sale is dependent on the following factors. First, the lender or the servicer. So as we all know, if you're getting a mortgage from Bank of America, Wells Fargo, or Chase, it's going to take you longer to get a final clear to close or a final commitment or anything from Wells Fargo, Chase, or Bank of America than it would if you go to a local mortgage company, a wholesale lender, or someone like that. So the same principle essentially applies when it comes to short sales. So if you're having to deal with America on a short sale, their process is not nearly as streamlined as Ditech, or dare I say, even Ocwen. And I know that lots of people hear horror stories about Ocwen, but Ocwen is actually one of the best short sale processors there is, or one of the best servicers there is when working with a short sale, as long as you understand the process. So that's number one, because the servicer will determine the process in terms of paperwork that you have to submit, how they interact with you, the feedback that they give you, the guidance that they give you, all of those things. So that's point one. Number two is the investor. And what I mean by the investor is who actually owns the mortgage. So if you're talking about Fannie or Freddie, now those transactions are going to be a little bit simpler because there are clear-cut guidelines for what a short sale looks like when it's a Fannie Mae short sale or it's a Freddie Mac short sale. Deal with a private investor and things get a little bit less clear. Private investors do less loans, have tighter guidelines, they consider a lot more, they often want to foreclose more aggressively than Fannie or Freddie would, so on and so forth. So the investor, the actual owner of the mortgage, the person who's actually out the money, or the entity that's actually out the money, they play a big role. The seller. Of all these factors, there's nothing more important than the seller. And it's important to realize that if the seller isn't completely committed to the process, then there really will be no short sale, or it will be painful. So we talk to our agent partners all the time, and we talk to them about the fact that you can't convince someone to sell their house. It's just not something that you can do. People have to arrive at that determination independent. What you can do is you can guide that process by educating them on the fact that a short sale is a benefit to them, does provide a benefit, provides them with the ability to move on with their life, gives them a better future, so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that even after you do all of those things, and a lot of those things are common sense and they'll know them, they still need to participate throughout the process. They'll need to allow you to show the property. They'll need to accept an offer that's reasonable. They'll need to provide bank statements and pay stubs, so on and so forth. So it's extremely important that in any one of these situations, if you're engaging the seller directly and listing the property, or if you're having another, or if you're referring it to us for us to list, market, and negotiate the short sale, in all of those scenarios, transaction only works if the seller is engaged and understands that they need to participate. Lastly, the processor. So I guess, 10 or 15 years ago, our service wasn't necessary, didn't exist. However, short sales are a reality now. And I guess fortunately for us, but maybe unfortunately for people in these situations, short sale volume isn't going away. When we started the business in 2012, we were often looking at property sales that were made in 2004, 2005, 2006, at the very peak of the real estate market. And it seemed very apparent to everyone around us when we were starting the business, people thought we were crazy because people felt that short sales were a fad, that they were something that was going away, that it wasn't going to last forever. And lo and behold, here we are. We're in 2016, and unfortunately, we're starting to receive short sales from property purchases from 2012 and 2011. And really what that indicates to us is that the market has run up in a disproportionate way. And as a result of macroeconomic conditions, maybe people aren't quite able to support high property values. It's interesting to note that property values now are at an all-time high. So we are beyond 2005 in terms of price points. And that all, to us, kind of indicates that a lot of what may have happened in 2004, 2005 may be taking place. Obviously, it seems like there's a role for us. Truth be told, the processing business is very difficult because it's very time intensive. And so as you're going through the process, if you're interacting with others and looking at having someone else process a short sale, obviously we'd prefer that you have us process it, right? But the fact of the matter is that if you're interacting with anybody that says that they're a short sale processor, if they don't have at least 7 to 10 people on staff, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to do their job. You need somebody who is working directly with sellers, period, and that's their full-time job, because they need to understand how to get documents from them, how to enter information onto bank-approved forms, how to walk sellers through the process of filling out that paperwork correctly. You need somebody who's constantly following up with the bank. You need somebody who's monitoring, all the different platforms that you need to work through in order to complete a short sale. You need someone to negotiate with the bank, create your closing disclosures, negotiate on fees, real estate commissions, so on and so forth. You need somebody whose full-time job is essentially negotiating with the bank on outrageous property prices. Fannie Mae in particular is very keen on essentially issuing counteroffers based on sheer speculation. One thing that we've seen Fannie Mae do lately is they will counter you 5% higher just because they expect the market to trend up another 5% in the next 90 days or in the next 6 months. So they figure, well, if you're going to buy the property and you're an investor, you're going to buy it for $200,000. We know that 6 months from now, that asset may be $210,000. We're not going to owe it at that time, so we might as well counter you now to the $210,000 and capture that $10,000 difference that we would otherwise have. And obviously, for them as an investor, that may make sense. But for you as a prospective buyer, it certainly would not make sense. So the processor matters because you have to be staffed. In order to be able to work through the complexity and the sheer volume of work that's involved with all of these transactions, you need manpower. So processors need to be knowledgeable, they need to make technology investments, and they need to be staffed properly in order to handle all the different parts of a short sale transaction. Keep in mind that in every short sale, just like in every real estate transaction, you essentially have a minimum of 6 parties involved. Working through and coordinating with 6 parties on any given transaction is difficult and requires knowledgeable people, technology, and manpower. So these are some frequently asked questions that we run across. So the number one question that we always get asked is, how do we get paid? So the bank pays us, and I think that's the simplest way to put it. Our fees are always listed on the HUD, and they're always paid by the lender. We're fully licensed, so all those things come into account. I'd say the next biggest question that we get is, what do you do if there are multiple liens? Well, what if Bank of America is in first position, Dytex is in second position, so on and so forth, all of those sorts of things? Well, fact of the matter is that all of these banks, for the most part, understand that they're going to be on the wrong side of a primary-secondary relationship. So what they've done is they've made deals, and the first mortgage holder will almost always pay a reasonable amount to the second lien holder to secure their approval and their consent for the sale. So all in all, lien holders, mortgagees in particular, work together. Another component to what we do, and this is something that, again, takes manpower, expertise, technology, so on and so forth, we look at title up front, and we do that in order to catch any issues, to make sure that we're negotiating with both lenders if there are two lenders on the transaction, so on and so forth. So it's not as difficult as you may imagine having multiple liens on a property. It's almost inconsequential for the most part. And for us, it really doesn't change the mechanics of the transaction very much. It's just an additional package, an additional set of phone calls we have to make. So obviously, if you intend to working with us and you're listing a property, then at that point in time, the question about commission will obviously come into play. We never affect your commission, and as a matter of fact, if you're working with a prospective seller and you are not an agent and you decide to refer that seller to us and have us market the property, we will absolutely 100% work in terms of compensating you for referring that consumer to us. So commissions are important. Everybody should be paid for the work that they do, and we obviously protect commissions and pay those out and make sure that they're paid. We do work with attorneys, and we do some of our best work with attorneys. We have created relationships with, I'd say at this point, probably 3 dozen or so very strong attorneys across all the markets that we work in. We make sure that they're compensated for participating, and they're there more times than not because we represent sellers almost exclusively. They're almost all of the attorneys that we work with are there to ensure the interests of the seller. And again, like I noted earlier, the bank will pay reasonable fees to all service providers in these transactions, which is obviously a huge benefit to everybody. So how long does it take to close? Well, that really depends on a number of factors. But I'd say if we were going to take a look at an average, right now we're typically looking at getting an approval and right around 90 to 120 days. Now there are transactions that are much more difficult. I can think of a transaction that we recently closed where there were 3 banks, IRS, Mass Department of Revenue, multiple judgments on the property, and there was an estate issue. So obviously in a situation like that, the length of time that it takes to close will be much more significant. But even in that situation, on that particular transaction, we were done in under 6 months, which, given the factors and the fact that no one involved at the outset thought it could ever be done, I would say that 6 months is a reasonable time frame. So with regard to regular updates on the file to see where everything stands from the seller standpoint or from the agent standpoint, so on and so forth, we have dedicated personnel to interface with and answer any questions with regards to where this file stands at any given time. Technology also plays a part in that because your ability or your ability to access information has to be in real time. So everybody across the entire group has to be able to see what the other is doing, and we've developed a proprietary platform that allows us to do that. So lastly, and I think this is really so all the meetings that we've gone to with Boston REIA are amazing. But the one thing that we hear over and over again, and really kind of like the biggest question that we get all of the time is, Gabriel, where's the market headed? What do you see, and what kind of role do short sales play in that? And more to the point, for you guys in on this phone call, you're trying to figure out, what kind of advantage do I get by, including LMS in my toolbox? How can LMS help me grow my business? How can LMS help me do more transactions? And how do all those things factor into where the market is headed? So it's really interesting because the market in Massachusetts is so strong, and there's such a dearth of inventory that I really do think that I don't see the market crashing in the way that it did in 2008 anytime soon. And so I think anybody that says anything like that, I just think I think it would feel to us, just based on what we see, that it's incorrect. There are too many well-qualified buyers. There are too few properties on the market. The economy in Massachusetts is really strong. Employment is really high. And those macro factors really predicate where the market is headed. All of that being said, I think it's really important for us to ask the question, why is there such a dearth of inventory? Why aren't there more properties for sale if the market is so strong? In other words, if interest rates are low and there are well-qualified buyers in the market, why aren't sellers selling? This should be the key time for sellers to sell. They can get more money right now than they could at any point in history, essentially, because right now property prices in Massachusetts are higher than they've ever been. So to us, based on what we see, we believe that a lot of sellers are still recovering. They haven't made up 100% of their property value. In other words, if they bought the house in 2005 for $400,000 and the property value dipped to maybe $335,000 at the bottom of the market in 2012, now that the market is fully rebounded and that property now is worth $410,000 or $415,000, they do have equity. But they don't have enough equity to accomplish what you would want to accomplish in a sale. For instance, if you were moving up, standard couple, you buy your starter home, you buy it for $300,000. The average person lives in a house for 6.5 to 7 years, and the objective is to buy that house for $300,000 and be in a position where you've paid down some of the mortgage, and 7 years later, you can sell that house for enough of a profit to cover the costs of the sale and at the same time have some money to walk into your next purchase. So we think that's really what's driving the dearth of inventory. We think that even though properties have recovered to 102% of 2005 all-time pricing, that 2% or the 7% in equity that they may have is not enough money for them to sell, walk out with enough money to pay their costs, and buy a new property. So, and that's really where we think, how mortgages impact property values. Everybody knows the relationship between low interest rates and high asset prices. But there are a lot of transactions that can be done because consumers may be looking to sell, and if they're genuinely having a hard time and they've let the property go, or maybe they've even moved. There have been plenty of situations where, consumers have just moved. We sold a house 2 weeks ago where the woman had lived in the property for 20 years, realized that she could no longer afford the property, so she left. And she vacated the property, and she moved to Georgia, and she left her house in Dorchester just there. She was frustrated. She couldn't work anything out with the bank. And then lo and behold, 7 years later, she found us, and we were able to short sell the property for her, and now she's in the position where she can buy a new home in Georgia, and she's happy about that. And that's actually what prompted her to look for somebody, is she realized that the property had not been foreclosed and that she could not buy a new home until she got rid of the house that she had here. So all of that being said, I think short sales play a very important role in our market. Short sales bring release a lot of inventory that otherwise wouldn't come to the market, and all of that inventory is necessarily transactions for investors, but a fair proportion of that inventory is, because there's a very high correlation between a consumer that stops paying a mortgage and a consumer who doesn't replace a roof when it needs to be replaced, or doesn't replace gutters, or lets ice dams build up, or lets the heating system go by the wayside, or just tolerate bad siding, or whatever the case would be, all things that devalue a property that make it an attractive investment. So for all those reasons, short sales play a really, really important role in the market today and moving forward. And from our standpoint, we're excited about the fact that we're knowledgeable enough and we have enough depth to provide excellent service to both, sellers, provide a benefit to buyers by bringing additional inventory to market, and really help the market move. So much, again, over and over again, we just see short sales bringing inventory to market that would not normally be there. So a lot of what we can do to help you do more deals, call us, email us. We're always available. Our website has a ton of information on it. More than anything, we like to do business personally, so call us, send us an email. Jamie or myself or anyone on my team can walk you through what we can do. You can talk to us about a specific scenario, any of those things, and we'll give you as much guidance as necessary. And more than anything, I think what we do is offer direct answers. So it feels so often that when you're talking about distressed property, people seem to believe that there are a million different answers to every question. There aren't. That wouldn't make sense. There's almost always one answer. The only thing that you need to do is find the person that knows the answer because they've seen the problem before. So more times than not, that is who we are. We can provide the one answer because we've seen all of these situations, across everything that we've done. So that's really it. If you guys have questions, I'll certainly answer them. I hope that I covered most of the things that you would have questions about. If not, I certainly will answer questions now.
Gabe, I have a couple of questions for you. First, for someone who is an investor and they are not an agent, and maybe they're looking to either wholesale properties or they're looking to rehab and flip a property and it turns into a short sale situation. Question number one is, if they were to try and work the short sale themselves, how many hours does it take typically to take care of everything that's necessary? And B, if they say, okay, you guys definitely have the systems in place for us, we want to work with you, how does that work? Because then you wouldn't be listing the property.
Yeah, so the short answer, so on average, it's 60 man hours to complete a short sale. So, and that's just on the processing side. So that's gathering all the paperwork, putting together the applications, walking the seller through all the paperwork, and then working through the negotiation process, responding to the bank, calling the bank, and then closing. So beginning to end, on average, our short sales, 60 man hours. Now, if you're going to list the property yourself, how do you work with us? Send us an email. We have an outdoor sales package that's very brief. It's 4 pages. It condenses and it essentially requests all the information from the agent and from the seller in terms of what we need to start the process, and we take on the rest. So we make it very, very simple up front to start working with us. We ask for the bare minimum in terms of contact information for the seller, the lenders involved, basic documentation, and the rest we take on our own and we take care of directly with the seller. Allowing it, when we started the business, really what we wanted to do is we wanted to allow listing brokers to essentially put a property on your contract and set it and forget it, for lack of a better phrase. So as a listing agent, you want to be in a position where you can place a property under contract and all the things that need to go on in the background, we take care of without you having to do much of anything, except obviously following up with us to make sure that everybody understands where everything is at. from a transaction standpoint.
And as just an investor who's not a listing agent, then it works pretty much the same way, right?
It can work the same. In those cases, the simplest thing to do is what we do with Chris and Kim all the time is we'll have the conversation with the seller, and we'll walk them through the marketing process. And then at that point in time, we'll interface directly with the seller, the buyer, and put the two together so we can put a transaction together. Each and every single time, super simple, because we're really familiar with working with sellers and what they need, simple, and because we understand how to work with investors, we can interface and make that pretty seamless. In a situation where simple, we make it simple, and I know that may be boiling it down to its barest parts, but for us, for me, I really do think that when you know your business very well, I think it's easy to make everything simple for everybody that's involved. I do my best to explain as much as necessary, but I know what I need to take on, and I know that my responsibility is to make the transaction simple for everyone and to give everybody as much information as they need, no more, no less.
Kimball is asking, condo sales appear to be going strong in his area, but they're not interested in condos. Do you believe that condos are trending in Boston?
Yeah, condos are trending in Boston. Condos are definitely trending in Boston. There's such a lack of inventory, and there are so many people that are looking for ready access to Boston. So absolutely 100%. The difficult thing about doing a short sale with condos is that the comps are largely going to be pegged to the building. So buying a condo to flip is very difficult. You're just not going to get. You're going to get a little bit better than market. I'd say in a short sale situation, I can always put you in a position where you're going to beat the market by about 10%. So in other words, if everything else in that building is selling for 200, I can almost guarantee you each and every single time I can get you a sale at 185. Now that being said, $15,000 isn't enough to flip. But what we've seen is for buy and hold investors, condos are very attractive, particularly in Boston. They will hold their value. You'll get a slight discount to the market, and you get an asset that you could rent and get some cash flow out of on a month-in, month-out basis. So from our standpoint, if you're looking to flip, condos may not be the right thing.
Unless you do condo conversion and it's a 2 or 3 family.
Sure, something like that, right? Because certainly in Everett or in Somerville, if you can find something, a 2 or 3 family, or even in lesser markets, right? Like we've seen Dorchesters. We've seen condo conversions in Dorchester that are very successful. We had one of our clients that bought a 3-family from us. They bought it for $330,000. They did a condo conversion. They sold each one of the units for more than $300,000.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certainly a lot of opportunity, and I would, in very simple terms, I would say condos are definitely trending just because there's so little inventory in and around Boston. Absorption rates are so high. There's barely a month's worth of inventory in most of the major markets in and around Boston. So overall, I would say condos are an important asset. But again, from a flip standpoint, unless you're doing a condo conversion, like you said, Bernadette, I think margins aren't great on the flip side, but they are great buy and hold assets.
Okay. Kimball said, nice, thank you. I have a short sale I'm looking at. Expect a phone call tomorrow. What are your business hours?
9 to 6.
Okay. All right. All right, folks. Does anybody else that has been listening have questions for Gabe before we let him go for the rest of the night? Melanie said, very informative. Kimball said, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate this, and we look forward. I guess we're actually going to get the opportunity to present in front of your group in December, correct?
Correct. Correct.
Awesome. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, so you'll be there in December for our meeting, which is very exciting. And for the folks who jumped on a little bit later, there were people coming in right at 7. Some people coming in at 7:20. It has been recorded. Donna Donna Perry just asked, "Is this recorded? I missed it." I have recorded it, and I will have the replay posted on the Boston RIA website tomorrow, and we'll also send an email out. So,
Thank you, Bernadette.
All right, I think that's it. All right, thank you so much, Gabe. I look forward to you coming to the meeting, and look forward to you helping a bunch of people with their short sales. I know on a personal level, I used to try and work short sales with an agent investor that I used to work with, and oh my goodness, being on the 60 hours, your systems are amazing, because I spent 60 hours on the phone just trying to get in touch with the bank. So,
Okay.
so anyways, all right, well, thank you so much. Peg said great presentation, and other people are happy that that we've got this recorded. So have a great night, everyone. Keep smiling, because the world needs more of that. And we'll play the replay shortly.